Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Apples and Genos Fantasy Hockey Podcast. My name is Naker Niblink. I'm the creator of Apples and Genos, originator of the Zero G Draft Strategy. In this podcast, I'm going to be breaking down all 32 NHL teams' goalie situations and trying to think about some Zero G candidates in the final stretch of the fantasy season. Let's get it. All right, welcome on in, everyone. Hope everyone is enjoying the Four Nations tournament as much as I am and is pumped for a Canada USA rematch on Thursday. Today, we're going to be getting into all of these goaltending situations, trying to figure out who we should be prioritizing, classic zero G situations, end of the season. Last year Charlie Lindgren emerged in this time frame. There were a number of others that you could have had in the back half of the fantasy season that really propelled you to fantasy titles. In my cases, in 3 leagues last year. So that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to isolate and identify some of those candidates. And even if we don't get all of them exactly right, at least we're pointed in the right direction, and we're getting some of these guys. We're taking those bullets. We're taking those shots. And if you do get those really nuclear guys who go absolutely off in the last bit of the season, and you at the same time have a tremendous skater group that you've been collecting all season long, and also obviously in your draft, then that's really the recipe for success that we find ourselves kind of fomenting here at Apples and Genos. Before we get into it, though, I am going to briefly run through some newsies. So first up, Shea Theodore. Seems like wrist or forearm kind of situation for Theodore. Not sure if it's broken or not. I thought I had seen that, but I couldn't find anything to confirm when I was looking up information on it just now. So it sounds like Elliot Friedman was the official thing was week to week, I believe. But Friedman was saying on the 32 Thoughts podcast that he thought it might be close to playoffs. I mean, it's Vegas, so take take that for what you will. But yeah, definitely a big change in scenario there for Vegas. Noah Hannafin, I would say I'm like 80 to 90% confident that Noah Hannafin is going to get power play one when he gets back from the Four Nations tournament. So yeah, Noah Hannafin, obviously a target if he's been dropped in your league, which he had been in a couple of mine, so was able to grab him. And I think that's probably a smart bet in most situations, unless your decor is already quite set. Uh, Both Kachucks got pretty banged up. Matthew Kachuk didn't play the end of the Canada USA game. Brady Kachuk came out and did not return to the USA Sweden game, but both sound like they're going to be good to go for Thursday, so I don't think there's anything there. There were a lot of illnesses going around. Linus Allmark was out. Ricard Raquel because of Banajad. You had Kel McCarr for Canada earlier. So yeah, I think there's stuff going around for sure, and you're just gonna have to be cognizant of that, especially as we get into this weekend, this first weekend back of fantasy hockey coming up. You're just gonna have to be cognizant. We're probably going to get some kind of last second things or things that crop up just this week, so be paying attention to the news there. Charlie McAvoy was admitted to hospital. This is yesterday, last night, I guess, as I'm recording this here on Tuesday. It sounds like he should be okay, but they think it's an infection with relation to an upper body injury that he suffered during the Canada USA game. So yeah, that's an ongoing situation at this point. He's not going to play in the Thursday final, but beyond that, it's kind of anybody's guess at this point what that might entail. So you'll have to keep an eye open for that. What that means for Boston, still, I don't think we have any confirmation on Hampus Lindholm, whether he's back for Boston. At least I wasn't able to find anything. So yeah, that is obviously a big question. Is it Lindholm? Is it Lowry? If McAvoy can't go on the power play one there for Boston, something to watch there for sure. Matthews has an undisclosed undisclosed injury, indisclosed, undisclosed injury that kept him out of the Monday game against Sweden. But he's going to play on Thursday, and yeah, it sounds like it's a relatively minor thing. Last thing here, just be on the lookout. We're going to get a lot more information. I think a lot more is going to come out when these teams start to practice again, and we'll say, hey, why is this guy not practicing? Oh, because he's been dealing with something. Hopefully we get more good information about players coming back. You think after a break like this that we should get some really good information about a bunch of players that may be able to come back. So I hope that's the case, but yeah, definitely we're going to have to be on our toes when we start to get practice reports here this week. So do keep that in mind as well. Now let's dig into it. Let's go through all these teams. I'm going to some of these are going to be pretty self-evident, right? Like, I don't think anybody's going to be surprised by what I'm going to say about Connor Hellebuck in Winnipeg. But we are going to take a look at the tandems, try to figure out, is there potential value there? If the starter gets injured, is there potential value for the backup? Do we like that idea? Do we not? Some of these, they're widely available. Starting with Anaheim here, both of these guys widely available. Lucas Dostal, 37% rostered on Yahoo, and John Gibson, 15% rostered. So widely available goaltenders, both of them here. I do think there's pretty good question about what you could or should do with these guys in particular. I have put this 0G potential in yellow type here on a few teams. So yeah, that is something to look out for on a few of these where I think like there's probably something that you can do right now and that you might be pretty interested in with one of these goalies. So right now in Anaheim, Lucas Dostal, John Gibson, it does really seem like they're going every other game. Both of them are actually playing quite well, I would say, at the moment, for the most part. Obviously, now they have a break and then they have to come back and do it all over again, but both of them seem to be playing pretty decently right now. Is Gibson going to get moved is the biggest question here. If Gibson gets moved, obviously Dostal's value goes through the roof because he would probably get a lot of run. At least 2 out of every 3 starts would be my baseline expectation. And to be honest, Anaheim is not as bad a place to play a goaltender as it has been in years past. It's still not great, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely not what it was in years past. So I would be very interested in Dostal if and when Gibson gets moved. If Gibson gets moved, there's only a few places where he'd probably have any value. So that I think the rostership percentages are roughly correct. That being said, you can still, as long as Gibson is on Anaheim, and because they are kind of going with this every other start scenario here, you can probably predict pretty accurately who's going to get which start based on the start pattern. And so you might be able to get 2 starts out of Gibson in a week, and that might be worthwhile, especially if they're against a couple of lower ranked opponents. So some serious 0G potential, especially if Gibson gets moved and Lucas Dostal gets a big run. On Boston, obviously Jeremy Swayman, the clear starter. The real question is, can you trust him? Yeah, it's been very well documented how much that Swayman has struggled this year. 298 goals against average, 898 save percentage. He's had some games where it really seems like he's figuring it out, and then he comes back the next game and it's not so great again. Yeah, it's been a rough year for Swayman. That's what I get for auto picking him in the Patron League. I think that in most leagues you're just kind of riding with him because he is a clear volume goaltender, and those don't grow on trees. So you're probably okay. Boston's in the hunt, so they're going to ride him. How many starts does Korpisalo take rest of season? I don't think it's going to be a lot, to be quite honest with you. So I do think Swayman, just as a pure volume option, even if the rates aren't quite there, I do think that Swayman, will be at least somewhat valuable in that regard. Boston's not a great team anymore, but they're certainly not a terrible team either. Buffalo, UPL, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen is the guy right now. The real question in Buffalo, I think, is do they give Devin Levi another chance given how the season is going for Buffalo? It could be a scenario where Buffalo trades a bunch of players at the deadline, like sells off because there's no chance of them making the playoffs, and so the team is just bad, and UPL is not valuable in that regard. But they also could call up Devin Levi to get some more starts in the NHL, and that could also eat into UPL's workload, which would obviously make him less valuable that way. So I do have a lot of concern about UPL right now, mostly just based around the team and their potential to sell here at the trade deadline. On Calgary, Dustin Wolf is this guy, right? I think it's pretty obvious what they're doing now in Calgary, how much they value what Dustin Wolf is bringing to the table. He's been terrific. The last three starts, maybe not as terrific as normal, but 912 save percentage for Dustin Wolf on the season. And that was after kind of a slow start on the year. So he's definitely turned things around. As long as he has some ability, some potential to win the Calder this year. I also think that gives you a little bit of extra insurance. Calgary's still in the playoff race as well. That gives you a little bit of extra insurance that they're going to be riding him more often than not. And so, yeah, altogether, I just think that Dustin Wolf is pretty set in his role. Dan Vladar, I don't think is much of anything at this point. So he's really just a risky spot start guy. And even if Wolf went down to injury, I don't think I'd be all that interested in Vladar. Yeah, you get some volume, but the team is kind of mid, and you could argue that Wolf has propped them up a little bit. They're minus 17 goal differential on the season. Yeah, I think that most likely you're not even that interested in Vladar, even if Wolf goes down, unless you're in a little bit deeper of a league. In Carolina, we have the true tandem between Frederik Andersen and Pyotr Kochetkov. Kochetkov has outplayed Anderson, especially at 5v5, at least in terms of raw save percentage over like basically since the new year. And so Kochetkov is the guy that I prefer just between the two, I guess. But basically, this is another scenario where it's going to be one start for one start for the other, and you can't really trust anything here. So, yeah, if you can get a couple starts, then you might want to pick them up. But both are pretty reasonably rostered at the moment. You got Frederik Andersen up at 68%, which is wild to me, and Kochetkov at 81%. So both of these guys are not really widely available. But I don't think you need to be holding either of these guys if they're not getting you a lot of starts either. There are some other guys that I'd probably be a little bit more interested in rest of season. As more bankable, I guess, at least on a week-to-week basis. And especially if you need wins, you need to pile up wins here going into your playoffs, then I don't know that you can stomach taking, just one start from one of these guys in any given week. In Chicago, this is, I think, trending towards a tandem situation at this point. Obviously, Petr Mrazek was the incumbent there, and he had been playing well for mostly last year. Going back to last year, he played quite well there. But this year, he's got a 327 goals against average and an 897 save percentage. He's been pretty bad. The last start was pretty good, but pretty much everything prior to that was pretty bad. And here's Arvid Soderblom with a 301 goals against average, but a 906 save percentage. He's actually outplayed Mrazek pretty much all season. And so I'm more interested in Soderblom. The last little bit, they have pretty much split starts. Soderblom even got an extra start in there, getting back-to-back starts against Tampa and Carolina. I believe there was something to do. I think Mrazek had an illness or an injury, if I'm remembering that correctly. It was a little while ago now, a few weeks ago. But either way, it's been pretty much every other start. It seems like a tandem situation at this point, unless things change coming out of the break. But I'm a little bit more interested in Soderblom. He's very widely available, 4% rostered on Yahoo, and maybe he even takes a little bit more of the net from Mrazek over the last little bit here. Obviously, if you're getting penalized for goals against, Chicago is going to bleed shots and goals against. But if you just need some pure volume, some pure pure total shots on goal, then obviously any goaltender in Chicago is going to face a lot of rubber. Colorado, Mackenzie Blackwood is the man, obviously. Scott Wedgwood is capable, and I do think he should be prioritized if, an injury were to occur to Mackenzie Blackwood. Obviously not wishing that on him, but if there were to be an injury here, then I would be pretty interested in Scott Wedgwood. He was listed as day-to-day. I don't really have a major update there, but I don't believe that that's anything long-term. But yeah, just a spot to note where if the starter goes down, then you should rush to the waiver wire to get Scott Wedgwood, because he would be probably one of the biggest 0G catches, the same way Blackwood has been to this point on the season. Wedgwood could be that guy if there were to be an injury there. In Columbus, you have Elvis Merzlikins, who's been the starter. He's been kind of up and down. He was trending a lot better. And then the last 4 games, it's been 5 goals against, 3 goals against, 3 goals against, 4 goals against. The Blue Jackets have been giving up a lot more shots as of late. In 3 out of those 4 games, he had over 30 shots against. You know, the Blue Jackets have just been devastated by injuries. They are looking to get a little bit healthier coming out of the break here, with hopefully Boone Jenner coming back, Igor Chinnikov hopefully not too far behind. Kirill Marchenko was apparently seen wearing a bubble, which means that maybe he's going to come back faster than anybody thought was possible after breaking his jaw with that puck to the face on the bench. All that to say, I think that Columbus can be better and Merzlikins can be better, but it is a spot where he is the true starter and he is widely available, 36% rostered, so there is 0G potential here. That being said, I am not like completely trusting this still. They have gone back to a hot hand. You know, Jet Greaves has come up and played back-to-back games in a spot. They have Daniil Tarasov, who's actually shown out not too bad at 5v5 over the last couple of months here. So yeah, it's not a spot where I'm like convinced that Merzlikins is the guy rest of season. You just hold him, but it is a spot where I do think there is some good 0G potential. Merzlikins is the guy right now, but I would be interested in anyone else getting some volume there. In Dallas, we have Jake Ottinger, true number one. DeSmith, not super trustworthy. Would I roster DeSmith if Ottinger went down to injury? I wouldn't want to. I guess I might just because Dallas is a great team. But yeah, it's not a spot where you expect Casey DeSmith to be some kind of terrific answer to all your problems. He does have a 911 save percentage on the season, but I question whether he could hold that with any kind of volume. Yeah, I guess I probably would if I needed a goaltender and Andre went down. DeSmith would be probably a pretty solid add at that point, but I would be very worried that he might just blow up at any given moment. So keep that in mind as well, I guess. In Detroit, we have a 1A, 1B situation. It feels like a Talbot edge. Lyon has won both of his last couple starts, but they have gone, or sorry, no, he did have that Tampa Bay start where he got pulled and Talbot came in, so that's not entirely true. Lyon won 2 starts and then got pulled against Tampa Bay. Talbot came in, he wasn't any better, but obviously coming off the bench, that's a hard spot. Prior to that, Talbot had won 5 in a row and played pretty well, so that was a good spot. I think Talbot has the edge here, and I think he's a good 0G play. 51% rostered right now, so probably taken in any league that's kind of paying attention. I know I have him in a couple of spots because of this run, so yeah, I'm into Talbot at the moment, but I'm also very into Lyon if Talbot stumbles and they kind of flip-flop on the 1A, 1B here. In Edmonton, you got Stuart Skinner, the true starter. But it really does seem like they are in the goalie market. You know, the John Gibson rumors, Edmonton is one of the rumored potential places for him to land. Yeah, Skinner is a risky starter at this point, just given the Oilers' proximity to those rumors. Picard, I don't think is threatening Skinner, so if they make no move at goaltender, then I would trust Skinner, at least for volume, if not for, rate stats. But I do think there's a lot of worry here that somebody could come in here and take a bunch of starts away from Stuart Skinner. So that's the biggest caveat with Edmonton at the moment. In Florida, you have Sergei Bobrovsky, clear starter here for sure. The interesting part is Spencer Knight here, right? Spencer Knight has come on as of late, especially. Basically since the new year, he's been terrific. 906%, a 906 save percentage on the season, but better than that as of late. Significantly better than that as of late. I think if there was a Bobrovsky injury, Spencer Knight would be an absolute priority, probably the biggest priority in the league as a backup if the starter went down to injury. So very interested in Spencer Knight if something were to happen to Sergei Bobrovsky. In Los Angeles, Darcy Kemper, true starter, obviously, but David Riddick has actually proved himself to be pretty capable behind the system there in LA over the last little bit. He's had a few rough ones. He throws up a bad game every once in a while, but on the whole, I think he's been fairly reliable, especially once the Kings have started to settle down a little bit. They've had some rough streaks here and there. Once they started to settle down a little bit, I think Riddick can be a reasonable play if Kemper were to go out. Kemper has been out repeatedly throughout much of his career, honestly. So yeah, Riddick is one to keep an eye on. Kemper, the true starter, player that you run out there, whoever he's playing against. Minnesota, obviously Philip Gustafson, number one here. I do think Marc-Andre Fleury is a player who could still get a short streak going, maybe not sustain, excellence over the long term, but, if Fleury were to get some run, if they had a Gustafson injury and Fleury was called upon, I do think he could prove himself capable, at least in the short term. Could be enough to, win you some weeks in fantasy. Fleury has a 910 save percentage on the year, plenty good enough to carry some teams. In Montreal, Sam Montembeault is the starter here. There was some question, Jakub Dobeš comes up and he has a terrific first number of games, but over the last little while, it really has been Montembeault. He started 4 out of the last 5 before the break. Sorry, that's not true. He came in relief of Dobeš in the final outing. That's right. So, yeah, Dobeš seems to be trending downwards. Montembeault seems to be trending upwards, at least in terms of usage. And so Montembeault represents, your classic volume goaltender on a bad team. That seems to be the setup here. That being said, I do think there's lots of room for others to get hot and get run. So if Dobeš were to get hot, wouldn't surprise me that he could get some run, especially if Montreal continues to fall further out of the playoff hunt. Could they make another call up and see what they have there? Not impossible. So I don't think this is settled by any stretch, but I do think this is a spot where a hot hand could do some damage. In Nashville, obviously Justus Saros is number one, big contract there, not going anywhere. And it doesn't hurt that Justus Annunen has been awful. Nashville has not been a great team this year, so it makes sense that the backup has not been good. He wasn't good in Colorado, comes to a worse team, and is also not good. Not surprising. Saros is just going to get run, but he has not been good on this season. Definitely not living up to his normal standard of play. You're even seeing it for Finland. They went to Kevin Lankinen over him. It's been a tough run for Saros, under 900 save percentage on the season. Just kind of another piece of this team and how bad this team's results have been on the season. Hard to figure out for sure. Do you hang on to UC Saros? I think it's similar to the Swayman situation. If you need just volume, then Saros is obviously going to get that. And there's probably a decent chance that he, figures some things out and performs a little bit better down the last bit of the season here. There's also a chance that they just decide to kind of reduce his workload a little bit, not risk any, severe injury or anything like that, and kind of reload for next year just because they're falling further and further out of a playoff spot there. We're halfway through the teams. I'm going to talk about the Patreon for a moment. Supporter tier, $2 a month, gets you access to patron-only live shows. Just did one of those for February where I talked about all 32 NHL teams, the lines, the power play lines. So I put that out there. If you're interested in that, $2 a month, you can find the recording on Patreon and the visual aid as well. $8 a month, the Apples tier gets you patron-only live shows, patron-only Discord channels, gets you my show notes for the waiver wire show and flagship show, and also gets you access to Apples and Geno's player evaluation tool, which really does help you out when making those add, drop, trade decisions. For the true degenerates, the Genos tier is there, $15 a month, all the previous perks mentioned. Plus, I will personally answer every single one of your questions, guaranteed. Let's get back into it. New Jersey. Here we have Jacob Markstrom injured. Seems like he's still a little bit a ways away from returning. And, New Jersey's not really in a spot where they have to rush him back. That they'd probably like to be ahead of some of the other teams in the standings, but they're probably not catching Washington for first in the Metropolitan. They're 12 points back there, so really not much of a chance there. As long as they're keeping a somewhat comfortable lead on the wild card, I don't think they'll be, rushing Markstrom back. So I think that for now, Jake Allen is a decent 0G guy. And then Nico Dawes, they've been playing around with him, bringing him up, sending him back down. I don't think he's going to get a lot of run, but at least keep an eye on what that situation is. Don't just assume that Jake Allen gets every single start. It's probable that he does, but it's not impossible that Jake Allen, kind of takes a dive and Dawes gets in there. Allen does have a 910 save percentage on the year, so he's been pretty solid. In the island, New York Islanders, Ilya Sorokin, he's going to get the volume, right? That's the biggest thing here. The biggest problem I foresee is that this team could go downhill. Barzal out long term, Dobson out long term. It's a 907 save percentage for Sorokin, so he hasn't been awful for sure, but he also hasn't been terrific. Did have a good stretch before the last two games of the season where he allowed 4 goals and 5 goals, or the last two games before the Four Nations break, I should say, where he allowed 4 goals and 5 goals. Yeah, really the question here is, does this team kind of go away? If they can't get a deal done with Brock Nelson, do they move Brock Nelson at the deadline and they get even thinner? This could be a situation where the team just suddenly can't score any goals and Sorokin is just hung out to dry basically from here on out. So that's a tough part with Sorokin, but he is going to get volume almost guaranteed. And for the Rangers, the New York Rangers, obviously Shesterkin's that dude. The Rangers need these wins, so they're going to keep riding him. Jonathan Quick has not been as good this year as he was last year. Last year was kind of unreal how good he was. This year kind of turned back into a pumpkin a little bit, 900 save percentage on the season. So Shesterkin's going to get all the run. Quick, you could be interested in if Shesterkin went down, but it wouldn't be the most interesting spot. In Ottawa, Linus Allmark is back. Really, he's going to get the volume, right? That's the situation. They need him. They need him to play lots of games. Really, the more interesting question is between Levi Merilainen, who performed really admirably when Allmark was out, 925 save percentage. Really impressive stuff from him. And then Anton Forsberg, who's the incumbent backup, who has an 893 on the season, has been very up and down in his starts. Right now, just probably because of NHL contract versus two-way contract, it's Forsberg that's up with the team. But that could change if Forsberg can't get things going and they need someone to spell Allmark and still give them a chance to win. So keep the name Merilainen in your back of your mind, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, if anything were to happen to Allmark again, where he goes back out, Merilainen would probably be the name I'd have more interest in than Forsberg. In Philadelphia, Samuel Ersson is seemingly the only guy who can play goaltender at an NHL caliber level. He's got an 896 save percentage on the season, but it has been improving over the last little bit. I would say he's actually been quite solid. Relatively since the new year, I would say. The question is whether the Flyers are anything at all. That is really up for debate. I think there's a chance they go away over the back part of the season here, and that could spell disaster for anybody in net for them. I don't really care who backs up here. I'm not interested at the moment. I would have to see a pretty good run of games from anyone who's backing up there to be excited about it. It's just not been a situation where any of them have provided anything for any length of time. Fedotov is the backup right now with an 877 save percentage. Truly gross. But Ersson, I am actually quite interested in, especially since he seems to be getting a little bit more volume, and he's widely available as well out there on the waiver wire. 24% rostered in Yahoo leagues. Pittsburgh, this one I'm pretty excited about. I've got Alex Nedeljkovic in a few leagues, 22% rostered, so he's still out there in a lot of spots. There is obviously the Tristan Jarry question. Does he get brought up? What do they do with him rest of season? I really don't know, to be honest. They returned him to the minors, and so it seems like they're just going to keep Jarry in the minors as long as Nedeljkovic keeps playing well. The obvious problem is that the Pittsburgh Penguins are not trending well. Crosby's a little bit banged up now. Malkin's been banged up. Rust's been banged up. A lot of their top guys have been banged up. And so if they don't even have those guys, could this team just completely disintegrate down the stretch? And even if Nedeljkovic is playing well, is he valuable for fantasy? Great question. If that starts to happen, if they start to fall further out of the playoff race and they just really have no reason to keep this thing going, does Joel Blomqvist get a few more starts just because they want to see what they have in him, give him a bit more run at the NHL level? That's also a possibility. But for this exact moment in time, I am pretty excited and interested in Alex Nedeljkovic. In San Jose, the number one thing I have written here is gross, because it is quite gross, this situation that we have. Georgiev, 875 save percentage on the season. It was bad in Colorado. He goes to a much worse team, and obviously it's much worse. Vanacek, really, really tough spot. Vanacek is not going to do anything. I don't think he was a passable goaltender in a really good situation for a minute. In this last game against Dallas, he gives up 8 goals. Really, the biggest question in San Jose is, do they bring up Yaroslav Askarov at any point and let him get some more NHL time? That would be the only goaltender that I'd have any interest in for San Jose for the rest of the season at this point. They would obviously, Askarov would see a lot of pucks in volume leagues where saves are, the most important currency. Then that would be of interest at that point. But outside of Askarov, I'm not interested in anybody here. In Seattle, Joey Decord's the only guy worth mentioning here. They've sent Grubauer down through waivers, cleared obviously because no one wants that contract. Seattle has been kind of a mess this year, but Decord is still rocking a 915 save percentage. He's been terrific, getting incredible volume. This is as good as it gets in terms of a volume situation, but the team does seem to be headed downwards, and they could decide they don't need to run Decord into the ground for a lost season at some point. That would be the only question in my mind. Otherwise, I think you just ride with Decord and capitalize on all that volume. St. Louis, Jordan Binnington, obviously the guy there. I don't think they're going away from him anytime soon. Binnington does only have an 897 on the season. The team is trending downward here in St. Louis, it does feel like as well. Maybe they'll be able to turn some things around. They still have some decent players here. Hofer's been slightly better, 903 save percentage, but I don't really see him as anything more than a spot starter just because they seem to be so fixated on Binnington, basically. The Blues could be sellers, and so that could be interesting. It could also spell disaster if they really do sell some players. Braden Shen's name has been tossed out there. If they do sell, then you could see the situation get worse, and that would obviously be even worse for a goaltender with a sub 900 save percentage here, so keep that in mind as well. In Tampa, Andrei Vasilevsky, he's going to get run. Tampa Bay is not as assured of their playoff situation as they have been in years past. 66 points. You have the Senators and the Red Wings right behind at 62 and 61. Bruins right there at 60. So definitely they're going to need to continue to rely on Vasilevsky. There's no one else really worth mentioning. In the case of a Vasilevsky injury, could you go to the backup? Yes, you could. Are you going to enjoy your results? Much less certain. It's just not as good of a spot, obviously, as it has been in years past. Jonas Johansson is the backup there, but he has been day-to-day, so you'll want to keep that in mind as well. 892 save percentage for Johansson on the season. He's not a terrific backup option. In Toronto, you have a 1A, 1B situation. It feels like Anthony Stolarz should or is the 1A. Joseph Wall had to take a lot of starts while Stolarz was out. Stolarz comes back in, is immediately very good in a win against Seattle. He has a 929 save percentage on the season. I feel like if there is some question of who to give the extra start to, they will give it to Stolarz the rest of the season, so I would kind of consider him the 1A moving forward. But Wall has played well. There's no question about that either. So I do see this as most likely just a total split tandem rest of season as they try to keep both guys fresh and healthy heading into the playoffs. For Utah, really this is an interesting question. Is it Vejmelka or is it Ingram? Vejmelka has gotten more work. And Ingram did, come out of the final game, the Sunday game before the Four Nations break with an upper body injury. So don't have a lot of details on that. So definitely keep an eye on that. If it's more long-term, then Vejmelka obviously going to get some run again and could be valuable. The other question is, is Utah going to eventually sell off here? They are 6 points out of a playoff spot right now with one game less than the Canucks in the final wildcard spot. So it's not like they're in the best spot to make a push here. Could they eventually be sellers, and could that affect their goaltending situation as well? Definitely could. Vejmelka has played reasonably well as of late, but definitely not as good as earlier on in the season where he was lights out. 909 save percentage on the season. There's definitely 0G potential here, but keep an eye on what this team is doing and what the trend is. And honestly, it could be Vejmelka or it could be Ingram, depending on if Ingram is healthy and can get hot. Ingram has had a terrible season so far, 884 save percentage on the year. So if they're both healthy, I do expect it'll be a 50-50 split, but that's up for debate for sure. And Vancouver, can you trust Demko? Can you trust Lankinen? These are the questions we need to ask. So Demko in the final game of Vancouver's season before the Four Nations break here, he only lasted 10 minutes and then exited with an injury. It wasn't disclosed what that injury was. Hopefully, it's not related to the knee condition that he's been dealing with. 891 save percentage for Demko on the season. He had actually been playing quite well leading into that game. So yeah, that part is exciting, I guess, for Demko, if he's not actually all that hurt. That is the real question here. If he is hurt, obviously Lankinen has done it before. You feel like he could probably do it again in terms of playing well for this team. Came into that game and got the win, 905 save percentage on the season. But yeah, Vancouver is not having their greatest season by any stretch either. They are still in the playoff spot at this moment, but it's been a tumultuous season to say the least. So either way, I think you should expect some more confusion on the way here. I don't think this is over just yet, unless a Demko injury really clarifies things for us. In Vegas, Aiden Hill is the 1A here. Definitely not going to be taken over by Ilya Samsonov anytime soon. That being said, as long as they're kind of cruising into the playoffs, I mean, I guess they can try to push for first in the Pacific. That's definitely something that they could see as a goal to strive for. But Samsonov has been usable, and I feel like they're going to try to keep Hill fresh for the playoffs. So I do think it'll be close to a 50-50, maybe more of a 55-45, as long as Samsonov is able to handle his starts the way that he has so far in the season. Yeah, I think it's a reasonable spot for either goaltender, especially if you can kind of predict with start patterns that you're going to get 2 games played. For Samsonov, I wouldn't mind picking him up in any given week. Washington, Logan Thompson is the 1A, but best guess here is a 50-50, at best a 55-45, similar to Vegas, but probably even more confident that this is a true split. Charlie Lindgren, they've been in talks for an extension there. I don't think anything got pushed across the finish line, if I'm remembering correctly, but Logan Thompson has his extension done. So yeah, it's really a 50-50 where they see both goaltenders as a big part of their future. I think that most likely it's just a 50-50 all the way the rest of the season. They're cruising at the top of the standings. They don't really have a reason to go hard with one goaltender versus another. Yeah, most likely 50-50 rest of the way. Winnipeg, Connor Hellebuck, the only thing going. Although Eric Comrie has been good of late in his spot starts, but they are just spot starts. So I wouldn't mind Comrie for some spot starts, but obviously Connor Hellebuck, consensus best goaltender in the league at the moment. And Winnipeg, I think they have the most points in the league at this point, 81 points. Yeah, they have the most points in the league at this point in time. So best goalie on the best team, just a slam dunk in terms of what you're doing there. Well, if you made it to the end of this one, you should definitely click the link in the description, join the Discord community, and talk fantasy hockey with us all the time in there. While you're here, like, rate, review, subscribe, comment really does help us out. But I think that's going to be it for this episode. Hopefully it brought you some value. I hope you get a little bit better at fantasy hockey today. All the advanced stats you heard today came from Natural Stat Trick, a terrific free resource. Many thanks to the band there for supplying music for the podcast. Be sure to check out their Spotify as well. And that's it, folks. Much love.